Hey folks, welcome back. So this week we are back to working on our workbenches that we started last week. So we got one over here and another one over here. And as you may recall, we need to put some pegboard on the back here, give us some space to hang stuff up. And as it just so happens, I have a sheet of it right here on some sawhorses. So we need to cut this thing in half because this is a 4x8 sheet and we only need a half sheet for each of the workbenches. So let's get this stuff cut up and we can start working on getting these things finished off. Alright, well we got these things hooked up here. Now we still need to run a couple more 2x4s across. We're going to put one across the top and one across the bottom because these things are kind of flimsy. It's like 1/4 inch, if that thick. So it's not really all that rigid, and it's like a composite board, so it's pretty flimsy. So we need to add some more 2x4s on there. Hook those onto our uprights that we got at either end. However, as I started working on this today, I realized I forgot the impact driver to put our screws in to hold stuff together. So the little screws that we put in here, I did those by hand, but I don't really feel like doing the others by hand. So we'll put those on tomorrow when I'm out here, if I remember the driver. And then also, as you saw, I picked up some assorted hooks and stuff like that you can put on the pegboard there to hold stuff, and sorted those out. Now one little trick of putting this stuff up is that I actually put in some washers in between the 2x4 and the pegboard. So that way you get a really small gap in between here. I stacked like, I don't know, 4 or 5 washers. So that way, if you're trying to put in a hook that is right over top of where this 2x4 is, you've got enough gap in there that it's able to actually hook in. Because if you just put the pegboard right onto the 2x4, there'd be no gap and you wouldn't be able to get a hook in there to hang something if you wanted to. So anyway, next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna cut up a few of these 2x4s so that we have our boards ready to put on here tomorrow. Alright, well today I remembered to bring this with us. So we are going to go ahead and see if we can't finish off putting these workbenches together. Alright, well we got our 2x4s up there, we got a few more screws in. We still have a few more screws left to put in, but I'm out of washers to act as the spacers in between the pegboard and the 2x4s, so that is as far as we can go with putting those in. It's pretty good as it is, but I just want to put a few more in just because it's not going to hurt anything and it'll stiffen it up a little bit more. But I think we're good to go as is to go ahead and start hanging stuff on here. But before we do that, we need to move some of this stuff over here out of the way because these workbenches are going along this wall right over here. So we need to move that stuff, get our workbenches over there, and then we can start hanging stuff up on it. Alright, well, we got all that stuff over there. I got some of the stuff hung up and sorta-ish organized. I've got more stuff that I've got to bring out here yet that's just sorta in boxes and stuff that I haven't really had a place to put. So hopefully we'll start bringing some of that stuff out and getting it kind of organized over here. So now we are going to come back around to this table saw again, and we're going to mess with a little bit here and see if we can't get this thing fixed and up and running. Alrighty, well, we got some epoxy into this thing around the pivot point in there, and so we got to let that set up before we can make sure we didn't get epoxy on the wrong parts and it's totally locked up. But of course that's got to set for a while. It was kind of hard getting up in there to get it where I needed it, so I kind of just got enough to sort of hold it in place. We'll let that set up, and then tomorrow we'll come out, pull it apart, really get a good job on there, and then let that set up, put it back together, and then hopefully it'll work. Alrighty, well, first thing today, let's see if we can't get this part off from our table saw and get that really well epoxied up. Alright, with that done, we are going to head down and we are going to finally move our cook stoves around, so that way we've got some space to be able to drive through underneath the mill house here. Alright, well, we did it. We got them over here. The first one was definitely a little bit easier because I was able to make use of our gap here in between the posts where I could kind of back the loader into here to get it maneuvered out. The second one over here was kind of lined up with this post here. So as you can see, I had to disconnect the forks, move the loader out, pull the forks out by hand from underneath the cook stove, and then get those out of here. If I had a second person to act as like a spotter, I might have been able to get it out without disconnecting, but it's just, you don't have all that great of visibility from inside as far as seeing where the back of the loader is and stuff like that. And I really didn't want to run into one of these posts over here, so it was just easier to disconnect. But anyways, we have this area all cleared out now, so we can pull stuff through here and whatever. We can park the truck under here if I got to do work on that, which seems to happen all too often. We can park the loader under here. We've got work to do, of course, with the hay wagon running gear that's going to become the mobile chicken coop, so we can bring that under here to do work. So this should be really nice having this cleared out now. Alright, so we got the running gear over here, and the reason I brought it in here is I actually want to do a little bit of disassembly on this, because with the way this thing is built, we got a larger diameter tube here, and then we got this smaller diameter one that kind of spans the distance across here, and then at the other end we again have a larger diameter that the smaller one goes into. Now, I want to see if there is any extra pipe in this kind of upper area here. And if there is, I might be able to stretch this out a little bit. Now, because what's going to be on here is just going to be mostly air. I mean, it's a chicken coop. There's not that much weight in it. I want to see if I can't lengthen it a little bit to get a little bit more coop on top of this running gear. Alright, well, as I suspected, this smaller inner pipe went all the way up to where the kind of the axle goes across here. Now, you may be wondering if this is going to affect the structural integrity of the wagon, and I really don't think it will. Now, this is going to come back in a little bit because the end of the inner pipe is right about where the hole is there, so that's out too far, but we'll bring it back in, and as long as there's, you know, a good 6 or 8 inches in there, I think it's going to be just fine, because the weight of the coop is actually going to be resting fairly squarely over top of the axles on both the front and the back, because there's going to be a couple of beams that are going to span this distance across here, and they'll hook onto these pieces right here. So actually the weight is going to be kind of in those beams and coming down on top of the wheels. It's not really going to be in this pipe. This mainly just is what connects the front and the back axles together and kind of holds it together and keeps it from pulling apart. And as you can see on this outer pipe, there's only about 1.5 inches of metal in front of there that's keeping it from pulling apart on that part. So I tend to think that it's probably fine to stretch this out a little bit. Alright, last day for this week. Now, last night I was attempting to get this inner pipe out of the outer pipe on the back end of the running gear here, and I think I've got all of the welds ground off, but I wasn't able to get them to actually separate. Now, I had the tongue of the running gear here hooked up to the truck, and I was pulling on it with the loader, and even with having the back wheels of the truck blocked so it wouldn't be able to roll, it was actually pulling the truck backwards. So it wasn't quite enough of an immovable object to really get a good pull on it. So what we're gonna do is we are gonna roll the running gear out from underneath the mill house here, and we are actually gonna hook the front of this to a tree. And hopefully we aren't gonna pull the tree over. Alright, well, as you can probably hear, we've got a bit of a rain shower coming down right now. So while we wait for that to pass, and hopefully it will, we are going to work on this little table saw, see if we can't get that part on there, and hopefully it will do what we need it to do, which is allow that top to pivot as well as kind of hold it in place. Alright, well, I think we got this thing fixed up. I took off the extra little bars and pieces of metal that were on the edges. That stuff I really don't think was original. I think that was added on after the fact, and that was what gave it kind of the larger table on top of here. And I think that may have been what contributed to that one part breaking, because it was very much weighted on this side. I think it was too much for this small of a thing, and it just wasn't designed for that much weight and for it to be offset on that side, and I think that's why that one part broke. So anyway, like I said, I took all of this extra stuff off, so it's back down to just the basic saw on here, and it seems to be good. At this point, what we need to do is get a new belt to put on here, because the old one was rather stiff. And so if we get a new one of those, we can test this thing out and see if our hard work has paid off with a working table saw. So it doesn't look like the rain is going to be letting off for the rest of the day. So I don't think that we are going to be able to do any more on the running gear. I mean, we could, but I just assume not. So I guess this is going to do it for today. Next week, hopefully we'll be able to get back to working on that and get that pulled apart the rest of the way. I successfully got it about, half an inch, 3/4 of an inch out, which means that the welds are fully ground off. It's just really slow going. I think it's just that we have a lot of rust in between that outer and inner tubing, and there's just enough of it in there that it's just really binding it up. So it's just a matter of trying to work it back and forth and pulling and twisting and pulling, and you get the idea. So hopefully we'll be able to get that freed up next week. Then also, depending on how those things go, I want to do some work on these doors over here. I'm not quite happy with how they're hanging. The one kind of rubs on the floor when you open it. So I want to see if I can't mess around with those a little bit and get them a little bit better to open. So we might work on those a little bit next week too. We'll see how everything plays out. So that is going to be it for this week's video. As always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you next time.